This is The Literary City with me, Ramjee Chandran.
Hello. My name is Pranati, but you can call me P. That's P with an A, not another E. It feels so good to be back on the show. I've missed it, and I dare say so have you. Today, I'm filling in for Ramjee Chandran, and it is my privilege to be asked to introduce our guests, Dr. Alka Pande and Kamini Sawhney. Tour de force of the art world, Dr. Pande is author of a fascinating series of books, 108 portraits of Indian modern and contemporary art. The series spans all aspects of art, including those that lie on the periphery, like printmaking. Each book featuring 108 aspects of the discipline. And in conversation with her, we have another tour de force, Kamini Sawhney, TV journalist and former director of Museum of Art and Photography. And she sits in for Ramjee as guest host. Both of them, our guest and our guest host, are right at the top of their game, and we are honored to be able to feature them today on The Literary City. This promises to be an exciting and artful episode. I'm sorry, I simply couldn't resist. So, with that, here's Kamini Sawhney.
Thank you, Pranati. Hello and welcome to a conversation on the arts, the visual arts in particular. In general, it's not a subject that evokes wild excitement from people. An encounter with the arts is sometimes greeted with a yawn, or worse still, a worried frown. I don't get it. I'd rather do something else. But art is really food for your mind and your soul. And I am convinced that everyone must have the right to experience its transformative power. In this podcast, I am in conversation with someone who has in many ways made the connection, who has created pathways for people to access our cultural wealth and understand why it is relevant to our lives today. It is my pleasure to speak with Alka Pande, whom I have often heard described as an art historian, but to my mind is so much more than that. She has immersed herself in the arts in a myriad ways over the last 30 years, as a teacher, art critic, curator, writer. Her strength, perhaps, is her ability to pique the interest of her audience and present complex ideas in ways that are relatable. Early on, Alka decided to focus on certain key areas within the arts: gender, identity, sexuality, and the traditional arts. And she has opened up the discourse on these subjects through her extensive research and writing, while still making it engaging for the wider audience. There are many institutions across the country with whom she has shared her learning. The very first being Punjab University, where she taught art history for over 20 years. With a great sense of adventure, she set off mid-career to London to study critical art theory at Goldsmiths when she received the Charles Wallace Award. Back in India, Alka energized the Visual Arts Gallery at the India Habitat Centre in Delhi as advisor and curator, transforming it into a key space for modern and contemporary art and conversations around it. That's not all. She has also played a role in the development of newer museum spaces across the country, including the Bihar Museum, Udaipur City Palace, and Kanha Museum in Madhya Pradesh. But perhaps she is most celebrated as a writer on Indian art and culture, particularly on a subject where others have tread warily: eroticism. Among the several books that she has written are Ardhanarishwar, The Androgen, Probing the Gender Within, Body Sutra, Shringara, The Many Faces of Indian Beauty, The New Age Kama Sutra for Women, and Fabulous, A Cultural History, which is really a play on the word phallus. What Alka has attempted in her books is an understanding of the role that sensuality and eroticism have played in our culture. moving away from the Victorian lens of our colonizers, or the titillation that often accompanied the presentation of erotica. One of the reasons, of course, that we are in conversation with Alka today is also to do with the 108 portraits of Indian culture and heritage, an encyclopedic collection of 14 volumes on Indian art and culture that she has recently written. Each of these volumes traces the evolution of a unique discipline through the perspective of arts and aesthetics, and include both traditional and modern Indian art, from music, dance, sculpture, architecture, design, indigenous art, textile, crafts, and photography. Alka, it's great to have you with us. Thank you for being a guest on the Literary City.
Thank you.
Well, what I'm going to do is to start at the very beginning so that listeners get a sense of where this was all born. In the city of Chandigarh, which was pivotal to your life, I was quite intrigued by this image of a young woman who arrived there after she was married and then found her life turned upside down. You came in from Bombay with a background in history and economics and a career at Doordarshan and All India Radio that now came to a rude halt. And you turned to academia and art history. Why don't you talk us through that journey, those early years in Chandigarh and how it set you on a completely different path?
Well, you take me to another life, Kamini. You really do, because it seems as if it's another world. I went to Chandigarh when I just gotten married in 1981, and you can imagine how many moons ago it was. And Chandigarh was just a city of grey buildings, grey concrete, grey beards. The average age at that point was very, very, it was an aging population, even though it was built on the Nehruvian plan of India's modernity. So for a 24-year-old who left Mumbai, or Bombay as it was then called, and was very much in the ritzy world of Doordarshan, I used to read news, I was with Nirmala Mathan, Dolly Thakur, I was the youngest newscaster at that point, doing voicing for ads, doing freelance for Femina. And I thought I was just it, man. I mean, at 24, you're arrogant and you have, the world is your oyster. And you come to Chandigarh, where the highest building was of 3 floors. And my husband was a young officer in the administrative service. And when he takes me to this apartment block, which was for very young people, and I said, "Where's the lift?" And he said, "Lift? What lift? We don't have lifts in Chandigarh." And so you can imagine going from a city of skyscrapers of Mumbai, I go to this Chandigarh, where the first thing you have to learn is Sajje and Khabbe, right and left. And I didn't know what to do with myself and what to make of myself. But we are women, we are Indian, and we are resilient. I found that there was a very robust Punjab University, there was a College of Architecture, there was a College of Art, which was far removed from my world. And I thought I'd go and do a PhD in Chinese studies, because that sounded very, very interesting for me. And I had done Chinese history as one of my papers. And I thought, let me do the long march of China. So I go to the Department of History, and the person, I still remember, Dr. Johri, who looks at me, he says, "Kidhar se aaya?" I said, "Bombay University." And he tells me, "Oh, I don't know if the university is aligned with ours." And, I was so shocked. I said, "Bombay University, is it recognized? What does he mean?" Anyway, my ego was crushed. And at 24, one has a great ego. Not anymore. I have no ego left. I've been sorted. First by being a wife, then being a mother, and then being a curator, you're sorted completely for life. You have no ego left. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I said, I'm not going back to the department at all. And then I discovered art history. Mulk Raj Anand had set up the Department of Art History. There were some prominent art historians there, Professor B.N. Goswami, Professor D.C. Bhattacharya, and it was a very, very bespoke kind of department. It had a museum of its own, which was designed by Jean Array, and everybody spoke of art history in hushed tones. There was also an important department of theatre where Mohan Maharishi and others were there. So these two departments had a kind of a relationship with each other, and the art history department was housed where the literature department was, and I was very interested in all that. So I joined the Department of Art History there, and believe you me, it saved my life in many ways. It saved my life, it saved my sanity, it saved my marriage, it saved everything for me, because the minute I walked into class, I'd done a MA in history earlier, but when I started studying the history of art and getting lost in the world, not of Monet, but early Christian Byzantine art, looking at the mosaics of the Justinian Empire, looking at the Gothic architecture, discovering what is Art Deco, and then studying the tombs of Iltutmish, studying the tombs of the arches of the Alai Darwaza in Delhi, looking at Mughal architecture, looking at the jalis, looking at the domes. It was a whole new world which opened out to me. But not to forget the world of Indian arts and aesthetics, the world of rasa, the world of shadang, the world of what it is to understand the philosophy which guides traditional Indian art. It was a whole new world for me, and I was entranced. But then, money was also very attractive. I got a job to teach history at a local college as well. So life became exciting again. I started teaching, was a student, and I got a column with the Tribune on writing on art, on music and dance. So my life became as busy as it was in Bombay, but without the stress of travel. I would drive my car with one little finger. It was very, very lovely to drive around in those lovely roads planned, the grid planned by Corbusier's planning. And Chandigarh became wonderfully rooted for me. Mornings was teaching, afternoons was having a siesta, evening was taking a walk and then going either to see theatre, music, dance, and writing about it. So it was a wonderful world. I finished my second MA, and immediately after that, I enrolled for my PhD at the department under Professor D.C. Bhattacharya and started working on an image of Shiva called the Ardhanarishwara, the Lord who is half woman. And this was done taking off from Sivarama Murthy's iconic text, Nataraja in Indian Art, Thought and Literature. So mine was based on Ardhanarishwar in Indian sculpture, and that is what I did. It was so wonderful to be totally enmeshed in traditional Indian art. I felt very much at home because I had learned music and dance. My mother was a trained singer of the Gwalior Gharana. I had learned Bharatanatyam. So these things, Shiva was the lord of dance. Again, the arrogance comes. I registered for a PhD when I was all of 27, and I thought I'm going to deliver the greatest PhD in the face of the earth. But my God, it took me 10 years to finish it because immediately I got pregnant, I had my child, I had to travel a lot. I traveled the length and breadth of the country because, as I told you, arrogance. At that point, I thought, "Are kya PhD karungi?" But when I finished, my hands were trembling because the world it opened, the Shiva Shakti world that opened in front of me, I thought, my God, I mean, do I know enough Sanskrit? Do I know enough about Shakti? Do I know enough about um, Shiva? But my guide was very good. He just told me in a very soft voice, and he was a bonk, अभी तक हमारा कोई student का reject नहीं हुआ है. So I was so
Yeah.
relieved.
That's a wonderful thing about learning, right? The more you learn,
Yeah.
the more inadequate you feel because you realize how vast the whole world of scholarship is out there and how much more there is to absorb. But I really feel for you because I myself was a young bride who went to the city of Chandigarh just to visit because my husband was from Chandigarh. And I remember that
Hmm.
feeling of a little shock at where life had sort of stopped. But then, of course, you discover so many other things there that are happening as well. And it's wonderful to hear how resilient you were and how you made so much of what you had there and you took advantage of all the opportunities that presented themselves. So through the Charles Wallace Award, you then moved on to a postdoctoral research and studied critical art theory at Goldsmiths. And you speak of that time as crucial to understanding not only world art, but also understanding yourself, because exploring and comprehending your own culture and identity was fundamental to your own growth, professional growth and success. So did that then define that the work that you chose to focus on?
So, Kamini, I think I'm now a believer. I mean, unlike a lot of people with rational thought, which, it's more fashionable to be a non believer today. It's more fashionable to say I'm an atheist. It's more fashionable to believe in the Cartesian philosophy. But, I grew up in a traditional family where puja, part, destiny, karma. So I really believe that karma plays a very important and destiny plays a very important role in our lives. So when I got the Charles Wallace, I think I'd reached the end of the age limit. I was all of 40. I was lucky enough to be the head of the Department of Fine Arts at that point. I had finished my PhD and I had already finished guiding 3 PhD students. And I thought time is right. And here I go to London. But when I arrived in Goldsmiths, another challenge hit me, and man, that was even worse than my move from Bombay to Chandigarh. Uh, just think of 1999. It's only 25 years ago. But the internet had just got in. We didn't even know how to, I really wasn't conversant with sending emails because we were just learning. We are now so used to it with WhatsApps, now with AI coming in. But at that point, it was really, for me, when I go there, first and foremost, I didn't know the language of criticality. I go to do a postdoc. I'm sitting in the course of cultural studies at the most cutting edge place from where the YBA started. And they are teaching in class words like taxonomies. Now, taxonomies I'd only heard in the classification of butterflies. They're using words like heteronormative. Now, did we use that in traditional art? Did we use that in modernity of Indian writing? No way. And I had decided that I would uh, join the hall of residence. I would be a student again. I would not hire an apartment but live with students. And of course, multiculti had just started in London at that point, and I was living in this Loring Hall where I had a Singaporean, a Romanian, all kinds of people. And I still remember Beth studying music who came with a dictionary, and Singaporean student. I thought to myself, I said, yes, Singaporeans, they come here, they have money, they don't know language, and look at us reading, looking for words. I go to class and I hear all these big words. I hear words. I go to the class on reading the performative, thinking it's about performance art. And because I'd done the book on music, folk instruments of Punjab, so I said, performing arts, performative. I go there and I lost my tongue. I couldn't understand a word of what was happening in class. As a mature student, I'd go jumping up and sit in the first row. When I came back, I thought I almost was weeping. I said, now I have to go back. I'm a failure. I'll have to tell my vice chancellor, who had given me a year's leave with pay, as they say, for your studies, which you can always take a mid career break. And I said, what will I go back saying that I'm a failure? And that whole week, I was roaming around like a zombie. And a young professor, I still remember her name, I'm still in touch with her, Renata Dorman. She found me in the corridor of Goldsmiths, having borrowed that dictionary from Beth, trying to look at how do I do contour mapping of Spitalfields.
But Alka, it clearly worked well because just look where you are. So I really want to move on now to all your writing because I think our listeners are waiting to hear more about that. So one of your strengths is really that you're able to convey learning in a way that is both accessible and exciting to the reader or viewer. And that is most evident in 108 Portraits, where each book begins with a personal story from you that instantly piques our curiosity and helps us identify in some way with the narrative. I do think that these 14 volumes respond to a need. There are hardly any encyclopedias in Indian art. And I think the only existing one is the one developed by the Map Academy, the digital encyclopedia, but there is no physical copies really. So do you want to talk about what got you started on these books and how you have worked to make them an enjoyable interactive experience for the reader?
So, Kamini, it's a good time you interrupted me, because that was the point when Renata told me to buy 50 Key Thinkers by Lecter. I remember I bought it. And then she said, buy another set of books, which were on visual culture done by the Open University. Those were my saviors that helped me translate from a person of archaic knowledge to using cutting edge knowledge at Goldsmiths. And this is a thing which I felt was very much missing, because when I came back, I set up the visual arts for the Habitat Center. I was teaching arts and aesthetics at the College of Art as well. And I realized how little our students really understood aesthetics, how little they understood the relationship between performing arts and visual culture in traditional Indian art. And I remembered those times in Goldsmiths, when I still think it traumatizes me. And I thought, after almost 30 years of teaching, I owe it to my young students. It's not their fault that there is a gap in our education system, where in magical economies or very fast developing economies like India, there is a gap which our colonizers had left a pedagogy system here, which in the art world, which in visual culture in government colleges where I was teaching, had not been touched upon. The holy grail of Government College of Art still has the old syllabi, which is changing now. Now, with private colleges coming up, with Southampton University opening in Delhi, with the Ashoka University getting scholars from America and Europe, with private universities opening up, Shiv Nadar opening the liberal arts, change is happening. But where is the bridge? Where is the connection? I decided through my years of teaching, wherever I felt a gap, that should be filled. And my biggest gap was that the ones who came from a vernacular education, who knew the poets, whether they were the Chayavad poets or they knew their own language, whether it was Marathi or Hindi or Punjabi, they knew their local culture. But when you went to an English speaking government college of art, you did in the college system, there was no teaching of Indian aesthetics. How many of our artists understand rasa? How many of them know early Sanskrit poetry and how that Sanskrit poetry translates into shringar, into beauty? Therefore, I decided what is important for me is to leave some footprints behind, particularly in the areas which come out of my 30 years of teaching, whether it was indigenous, whether it was traditional art, whether it was music, whether it was design, because I taught at NID also as a guest faculty. I'll just take one of my books and just tell you how I started it. This, of course, is portraits, but let me take a book where I want to just say, for example, the book on Indian vernacular and indigenous art. And I just want to write, because for each book, I actually made a kind of a grid. I wanted to bring my voice into it. First and foremost, I wanted to use the word 108. Now, 108 is very important for me because it is not only a sacred number, it crosses a lot of disciplines. And Indian art is truly multidisciplinary. It is not in verticals, it goes into each other in a very organic manner. So, in the same way, 108 for me is a very important number in mathematics because 108 is 2 into 2 into 3 into 3 into 3 becomes 108. So it becomes the product of accurate mathematical procedure and a superior numerological consequence. There is the power of 1, 2, and 3 in math. It is also the Sanskrit alphabet. 2 into 54 is explained by the Sanskrit alphabet because there are 54 letters in the Sanskrit alphabet and each has, Shiva and Shakti, 54 into 2 times. Then it is also in geometry a complex number. It is also the number of the Akshay Mala, 108. It is also a symbol of Shakt, 2 inverted triangles. It has 108 pressure points. So 108 became very, very important. In each book, I had a foreword where I wrote what the book was all about for me. And each foreword put the whole capsule in a very, very interesting way. Then I wrote a preface for each book. Then I wrote an introductory essay, which was not more than 5,000 words, because our young children don't like reading too much. They want instant gratification. So if I'm offering them a feast, it should be the feast they want, not the feast I want to give them. I'd be happy writing 20,000 words. But everything simple, easy to read, no jargon, writing from the heart, things which were complex I did not use. And then I started explaining each aspect. Like for the indigenous, I talked of many Indias. Because every state in India is an India and it is complete in itself and it has its own indigenous art. Then there are motifs and symbols because Indian art is symbolic. Then I talked of the bhumi, I talked of forests. In each book, I put down the significance of 108. Then I have an aesthetic experience because that is an experience like the indigenous book. It is how do you make your own bamboo basket. It is like a DIY. And then for those who want to read extra, I have suggested readings. I have an extensive reading list. So it becomes like a introduction to the idiot or a person who wants to understand. And with each book, there is a takeaway. Now, in this book, The takeaway is a calendar for 2025, and this is a tribal calendar.
Festivals,
I like
right? I thought that was so charming.
So each of them has a tribal or an indigenous festival in each with a little write up, and you can pin it on your little board and read about it. So each of them has something or the other. Like my book on textiles, what does it do? It teaches you all about tie and dye. So you can make your own tie and dye. So these are things, it emerged after my years of experience reflecting, thinking, and I felt that 108 portraits which are selected by me. It could also be that some of them are not the best because to get permissions and you have to pay a lot. And who's going to? It's a four-color book. It's a price-sensitive market. I wanted every student to reach out, every library to pick these books because these are really getting your toes wet on all these 14 subjects. So that if anybody wants to know anything about Indian textiles, they pick up the book. They'll tell you in a nutshell everything. If you want to read more, you have your reading list. You can go ahead and go to libraries and pick up specialized books. But in those 108 portraits, you'll get a beautiful bird's eye view, an overarching view of the grandeur, the rich world of Indian textiles, of food, because for me, food also is a very, very important part of visual culture. It includes all the senses, all the five senses. It includes, so it is very, very important.
You know, Alka, since you picked up the portraits of vernacular and indigenous art, there is a section on the creative feminine. And I was interested in this phrase that you used about tribal women artists. There's, and I quote you, there's our unclaimed feminist artworks. Would you like to expand on that idea for us?
Yeah. So you see, I really believe, and I want to put first a disclaimer on this. I'm not a feminist because when you use the word feminist, that is too much activism for me. And I'm sure there is a requirement for that because when you're talking of equal pay, of your rights, legality, that's a different world. But particularly in the cultural context, I do not like to talk of gender based things too much. I want to talk of a democracy, I want to talk of equality, and I want to talk of inclusions. So, in that inclusiveness, the person who's really left out is the woman, is the creative feminine who is like Prakriti. Everything grows on the soil, and she's never recognized. You look at the Madhubani painters, you look at the women doing Sujuni, you look at the women doing Kantha. They never, they don't claim anything. They don't even reclaim anything. They're just making these functional objects, and they're so important. They're also using waste. They're also recycling waste. They're never um, uh, said or acknowledged, or the pulkaris which are done. Now you go to the Venice Biennale this time, what do you see? Textile art becoming so big. They're talking about the global south, they're talking about mythologies, they're talking about propaganda. And who's creating that? Women. So for me, it was very sad, and I felt a bit annoyed that the real lipai, for example, you put these mark makings, they're never acknowledged. So I thought it is time now for them to be acknowledged, for them to reclaim their positions of power, which is also about inclusivity. And that is why I write like that.
Well, you've been a prolific writer with over 60 publications. But what was remarkable is that you dared to tread where very few writers had traveled at that point in time, looking at Indian erotica, both from a scholarly perspective as well as its relevance in contemporary contexts. Because eroticism has usually prompted the nudge, the wink, the embarrassed giggle. But here was text that simultaneously examined the earliest terracotta images of the mother goddess and tantric diagrams, palm leaf paintings and celluloid depictions, miniature paintings and advertising graffiti. What drove you to take the plunge?
Again, it was destiny, Kamini, let me tell you that. So when I moved to Delhi, and all of us, and I'm talking again of more than 25 years ago, when coffee table books were big, and we all wanted to be as writers, we all wanted to do coffee table books. The biggest coffee table bookmaker at that point was Rolly Books. So when I was sitting in my office, I remember I get a call from Rolly Books. I get my editor, Veena Baswani, who says, we want to commission you, and can I come over to your office? I said, please come. I couldn't, I couldn't bear the time she was taking to come to meet me because it was my dream to be published by Rolly. So Veena comes and she says, we'd like you to do a book on Indian erotica. Without blinking an eyelid, I said, of course I'll do it. And I said, oh my God, but how will I do it? Didn't bother me at all because I was so desperate to be published by Rolly. I go home and I tell my husband, I said, now you have to help me with all your scatological humor. You have to. He said, but I don't do this. What is this? This is erotica. I don't know nothing about it. My young daughter, who was all of 15 or 16, who took pity on me, she says, Mom, don't worry. I'll help you. I'll download all the porno sites and I'll forget the Indian erotica. I just said, what? Mandakini looking at porn? She says, Mom, it's there on the thing and you can look at it. It took me a week to come to terms because she set me on a very interesting thing. Is erotica porn? That's what my daughter felt. My husband, who would crack all these jokes, had such a male attitude at the commodification of women. But nothing goes, whatever you study or whatever you do in your life, nothing goes waste. I suddenly hit on the idea of rasa, of Shringar, and Shiv Shakti. And then I started reading, and it came down to one of the myths which said the Kama Sutra was based on the lovemaking which Nandi heard when Shiva and Parvati were making love in Mount Kailash. And that set out the whole concept of Indian erotica for me. The world I started 25 years ago still fascinates me because, erotica is a much misunderstood, misrepresented, misappropriated word. Because when I was doing this exhibition called The Spiritual and the Erotic on the Kama Sutra in Paris, I couldn't take out some important images, paintings from here, because there's an important thing. Is this pornography or is it art? And I've been studying this for 25 years, whether it's Bhartrihari, whether it is Hala, whether it is Kalidas and, the Meghadoot, whether it is the love of Radha and Krishna, which is sacred. Erotic is a very, very important part of Indian philosophy because it is one of the Purusharthas of life. Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha. And I am so grateful to Pramod Kapoor, Rolly Books, Veena Baswani for setting me up on this journey of Indian erotica, after which I've done so many Kama Sutras, whether it is the Kama Sutra for women, whether it is the cult of desire, whether it is fabulous, where I've written on the palace. So it's a whole new world, the world of Indian beauty, the aesthetics of the erotic. And I think in many ways it is, I don't want to sound so lofty and so, how should I say, holy, but it is ultimately the basis of all human life, of desire. Because without desire, there is no life.
Alka, alongside the writing, you were also developing your curatorial skills. And I recall you speaking of curation as a discipline, likening it to a literary framework where you need to understand the importance of the footnote, the bibliography, and the endnote. What have been the discoveries and challenges of building the Visual Arts Gallery at the Habitat Center into a space of both learning and enjoyment of the arts?
Well, in the first 10 years, it was wonderful because even now, the canvas for me is very wide. Um, but the art world has changed. And the challenge today is that it has, in Delhi in particular, and I talk more of Delhi because that's my karma bhumi, it has moved from the place of production of knowledge to more a place of consumption. It has moved more from a laboratory of ideas to a space of transactional monetary exchange. So the curatorial framework now is not as important in the world of art because there's the art market which is leading it. 10 years ago, the art market wasn't leading it, the curators were leading it. They were the tastemakers, they were the people. Now that role has gone into museums. So, therefore, being associated with the Bihar Museum or setting up the sculpture gallery at Udaipur or curating the two sculpture parks for the Taj in Udaipur at the Lake Palace or redoing Bikaner Museum. And now I'm curating the to be renovated Patna Museum. That is giving me a chance to explore ideas, to do my footnotes, to write insightful um, captions, panels, which are not that required or the demand for them in the framework of a gallery space or the art fair space is not there.
I'm really happy to hear that because really in India we're struggling to re-establish the museum as a space of not only learning but of enjoyment, of innovation, of discovery. So it's wonderful to hear the work you're doing there and to know about that. Through your writing and curation, you've also devoted a large part of your attention to the revival of traditional arts, which we spoke a little about earlier. A part of our cultural tradition that was neglected, it was considered unfit to be part of the high art canon that we inherited from the British. For example, if you look at the lost wax method of bronze casting, which is more than 4,000 years old, but many of our painters and sculptors from rural areas were dismissed as folk artists. It was largely Hindu and Buddhist art that was foregrounded as classical and therefore worthy of a place in the museum. Are we making headway there in changing the narrative?
So, Kamini, I'm always a positive person, and I do think I'm lucky to think of growth and positivity. I'm not despondent. Now, see, two very important shows have taken place. One, The Serpent and the Tree at the Met, and now another show is opening at the Rijksmuseum. I think it opened 2 days ago on the Asian bronzes. So, the world is looking, one, at the global south. Two, I think it is realizing the importance of the handmade, even though AI is coming. So there is hope. And I'm sure the splendor, the Ming gold, which has been done at the Guimet, which opened, it's also celebrating the handmade and the gold. So I think there is a lot of hope, and I think in India too, we are reclaiming the wonder that was India into the wonder that is and will be India.
Okay, so you have played a key role in museums across the country, and especially in the development of the Bihar Museum and its Biennale. I remember the very first one in 2020 when the pandemic broke out, and we were all due to arrive there in a few days, and then nothing could happen. But you took it online 2 3 months later, and it was so successful with several sessions, speakers, panel discussions. So we're really looking at a world transformed by technology. How does that impact the written word, the spoken word and the world of art and culture. Are we the better or the worse for it?
I wouldn't like to use either of the words better or worse. I'd just say we're different. And I do think technology plays a great, great role in communication. I think we cannot keep technology out of art with AI actually gobbling up data everywhere. But can we keep away the beauty of the tactile and the haptic? I don't think so. The actual rasa or the aesthetic experience, which is between a real object of art and the viewer experience, cannot be replicated by technology.
So, looking at the future, where does Alka Pande see herself 5 years down the road?
Well, I don't know, 5 years down the road, if I'm going to be even alive. People are keeling over and dying. I don't know if technology is going to become a sentient human being and take over our world. I am in the moment. I'm enjoying every bit of my life. And I am focusing on what I know best. That is developing my world of ideas, looking at great art, which is going to feed into my writing. I will continue to write and I will continue to curate and move with the times.
Wonderful, Alka. Thank you so much for talking to the Literary City and for giving us your time. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you, Kamini. It was really wonderful talking to you and for your very humane and human questions. Thank you.
You have been listening to Kamini Sawhney in conversation with art historian Dr. Alka Pande, author of 108 Portraits of Indian Modern and Contemporary Art. There's a link in the podcast description to where you can get your hands on these amazing volumes. But, as we always say on the Literary City, please support your local bookstores. And what an insightful and interesting conversation that was. We will bring you many more such conversations going forward, so watch this space. I would like to thank our guest, Dr. Alka Pande, and our guest host, Kamini Sawhney. Both Ramjee and I thank you warmly, Kamini. We'll be back with more conversations with great authors featuring great books. And we're working on bringing you more episodes of our fun etymology segment, What's That Word? All that excitement coming up soon. And until next time, here's wishing you a great season and a rewarding 2025. Thank you for being here, and of course, thank you for listening. I am Pranati Madhav, and this is the Literary City with Ramjee Chandran. And, as I always say, bye.